Just to begin, I have listed a few topics to cover today. And before that, I want to give a very short introduction of myself. So, I'm from the 2009 batch of Indian Forest Service. But before that, after my MSc from Forest Research Institute, which included a dissertation in Kanha on tigers, I was a research fellow of the Wildlife Institute of India for about 3 years. And I worked in the All India Tiger Estimation Project in Kanha and Corbett Tiger Reserves. Thereafter, I was also with WWF for a brief period of 1.5 years, and then I joined the Indian Forest Service. So my posting has been in Andaman and Nicobar Islands for 5 years, where I was DFO Nicobar, and then in the Port Blair as DCF Chatham Sawmill and DCF Silviculture. And after that, from 2016 onwards, I'm with the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau in the Eastern region. So India is prone to wildlife crime and smuggling of different things. And primarily for most species, India is the source country. That is, our species are coveted outside of India for Chinese medical preparations or as pets, etc. And that is the demand. But for primates, they're kind of a reverse thing, and we do see most of the primate seizures are incoming seizures. There are animals which are coming in and not going out. So if we look at the past few years data, I'm not giving concrete numbers, but the general trend is to have exotic, the general reason that we have primates coming in is to have exotic pets like mostly chimpanzees, a couple of cases, then marmosets, and slow loris, which is something also indigenously available, and gibbons, etc. And if you would be aware, on 1st June 2019, there was a lion cub live which was seized, and with the lion cub, there were two probably white-headed langur or lao langur, and one Javan langur or Javan luto. So those are the seizures that happened last few years. Now, except for the slow loris, the mostly we see the species are exotic. And here there is a slight legal issue within India, because we have the Wildlife Protection Act, which protects the Indian species mostly. But there is nothing in black and white saying that it is only the Indian species which are covered. However, if you see the Wildlife Protection Act regarding primates, even some of the Indian primate species are not covered. So, so there's no question of the exotic species being covered. They're not there in the list. In some of the taxa, the Wildlife Protection Act mentions the whole genus or the whole um, uh, uh, tribe as protected, but that is not the case with primates. It is not. It is not there. So there is no protection for the exotic primates. The other thing is that CITES, which is the law for exotic animals worldwide, it is implemented through various internal acts of different countries. In India, it is implemented through the Customs Act and not through the Wildlife Protection Act. So, smuggling an exotic primate inside India would be a punishable offense by the Customs Act. However, if it is inside India and it is being sold or traded or possessed by an individual, there is currently no law to prosecute that person. It has to be considered legal. So that is the problem with all exotic wildlife and including exotic primates. So that is the situation. Besides these, the internal wildlife crime regarding langurs are some bushmeat hunting in the northeast. As you would be aware, some of the markets of Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Tamenglong, and those areas, some parts of Nagaland, they do present bushmeat of macaques and langurs. And beyond that, we have some conflict situations due to crop trading and pet the macaques especially. So those are the few instances of primate wildlife crime within India, but largely it is primates which are being brought in from outside. So that's about the primate, an introduction really to the primate crimes within India. Then a question was posed to me regarding how are they carried inside India. So Eastern India is especially vulnerable to wildlife smuggling, both in terms of species going out and parts going out and coming in. So we see that the Bangladesh border with West Bengal, Bangladesh border with Meghalaya, Bangladesh border with Mizoram, these are very sensitive with regards to live animal smuggling. And we have seen slow lorises and gibbons coming in from these borders. And DRI has been seizing some of these consignments. And the conditions, of course, are deplorable. The Javan langur and the white-headed langur or lao langur, which came in, they were in nylon bags, sewed together. The opening of the bag was sewed, and similarly, the slow lorises which were caught were in very small cages, cramped together, extremely stressed. The Javan langurs actually, the Lao langur actually, part of its tail was broken, and it developed an infection and had to be kind of chopped off to save the rest of its body from the infection. It had developed gangrene. So those are the conditions in which these are transported, so deplorable. And if you see the uh, West Bengal Bangladesh border, most of it is on rivers. So this particular consignment, I am aware, was carried by on headboard through the river. So those are the things. So there is every chance of contamination and suffocation in water and all that. So it's deplorable conditions in which these are transported. However, they do fetch a premium in the Indian market. The demand is from very high earning individuals, Western India, Southern India, who have a penchant for exotic pets, and in their farmhouses or something they want to keep these animals. And the chimpanzees, we are aware, uh, upwards of 25 30 lakhs were paid for each specimen. So that's the I mean, you cannot really put a value to wildlife, but that's what they are fetching in the illegal market. So, regarding how the enforcement agencies and the international bodies are operating and kind of coordinating to reduce this crime, uh, I mean, like all other smuggling and organized crime rackets, the agencies try to get the information. They have their sources at these border areas who try to collect information and give it to them in lieu of favors, money, etc. That's the internal working of the intelligence agencies. And after that, we do joint operations with police, with the local forest departments, the customs department. They do operation themselves or in tandem with us. So that is how we are working. We are also part of some of the international meetings. The Interpol, especially the Interpol, has a environmental crime division. So they do organize a lot of meetings in which the intelligence agencies share information. So in all cross-border crime, the issue of jurisdiction is always there. So the crime is carried out by somebody, and then he just slips into the other country. And if it's like Nepal or Bhutan or Myanmar, sometimes it's difficult to understand who is where. And so for better coordination, Interpol organizes these meetings, and details of active criminals, details of the routes, details of new modus operandi adopted, etc., are shared. And of course, the other thing is that when you see the other officers, let's say from Thailand or Myanmar or Bhutan, face to face, and you build up a rapport with them, then quick exchange of information and uh, quick real-time pursuit and seizure of the wildlife is often possible. So that is the kind of coordination we're trying to achieve. So it is quite good with Nepal, very good with Nepal actually, and their laws are kind of more stringent than us, and their implementation is better than us, more importantly. And Bhutan, of course, is a natural ally. It's quite amenable to our requests, but it's slightly more difficult with the other countries. So, as I said initially, India is a source country for most of the other wildlife, but in case of primates, it is only for the slow loris that we can say that India is a source country, but for the other primates, it's mostly incoming. And the demand within India is mostly for exotic pets, but a little bit is there for some black magic practices for the slow loris. And there is, as I mentioned, some bushmeat hunting in the northeast for some of the primates, and some conflict issues with the rest of macaques for crop breeding, etc. So that is the thing. Poaching is pretty low. If not for bushmeat hunting, there's not much very little use of other things, and so overall poaching smuggling pressure is low, in my opinion. If we talk about application of wildlife forensics on primate wildlife crimes, I would say I can think of only one instance, which was this chimpanzee smuggling, and the person had contested that these were the offsprings of chimpanzees which belonged to his grandfather, and those chimpanzees died immediately after giving birth to these. So those kind of stories, and there were three chimpanzee babies. So we resorted to DNA fingerprinting, and it was, I mean, it is still sub judice the case, so I don't want to talk too much, but whether these were our siblings or not, etc., could be established by DNA study. So we collaborated with the ZSI for this study, and I think there is also a scientific paper published on that. So, and it was remarkable because, as far as I remember, human markers were used to determine the chimpanzees, whether they were siblings or not. I think, and that was the first that kind of application in the world. So I cannot really remember any other forensic uh, application on wildlife primate cases. Regarding how we are limited in terms of fighting these crimes, WCCB was formed with the vision of having a CBI-like body for wildlife crime, but still, it is nowhere near what is required, looking at the magnitude of wildlife crime, especially in the eastern region, which is prone to smuggling because, as you're aware, the Chinese demand and the uh, Southeast Asian demand is the most regarding wildlife parts. And we have countries like Nepal and Bhutan and parts of Myanmar where the border is officially open. You can actually go into Bhutan and Nepal without anything. I mean, I'm sure you are aware. But in Myanmar also, there are border markets in Moreh where you can just go without any pass or anything and come back within the same day. So in these kind of scenario, it's impossible to detect wildlife smuggling. I mean, detect any smuggling for that matter, if you do not have pinpoint information. So so it's a big impediment, and it's difficult to intercept wildlife parts being smuggled out of the eastern region. The other thing is that technical capabilities like interception of phone calls, etc., which is there with the police, it is still not with WCCB because the Act mentions that national security has to be at stake so that this permission can be given. So we cannot intercept calls of known poachers and known habitual criminals, but the police, if they wish to, they can. So that is the thing, and I had already mentioned that there is a huge legal loophole regarding sighted species within India. There was a effort at amendment of the Wildlife Protection Act and to include the exotic sighted listed species, but that draft amendment, I think it's now 5 years almost. It has not seen the light of day, so I'm not sure when we are going to really have that. So, so these are the major problems that we are facing, and of course, all smuggling networks are highly organized networks. And when you nab somebody, it is likely that he's the lowest functionary, and he would just know that he has to get this package from such and such phone number and then deliver it to such and such phone number, who's going to tell him where that phone number is going to wait. So beyond that, he does not know anything. So it's really difficult to nab the masterminds behind these wildlife smuggling rings. So that is in brief the picture of primate crime in India. At the end, at the kind of end of this initial monologue, what I want to request is we do need an SOP regarding rescue and rehabilitation. We do not have that for any species. And recently we had requested, and I think we are going to get a turtle and tortoise rescue and rehabilitation SOP after being seized by us, by the forest departments or police. But for primates, the thing is, it is generally handed over to the rescue centers, and it is up to the vets of the zoo or the rescue center to do their job. Of course, they're veterinarians; they would know what to do. But I think it would help if there is a SOP regarding detailed veterinary care and other care that needs to be done right after seizing a primate en route. And as I said, because they're already very stressed, because they are already traveling in very cramped cages and deplorable conditions, I think it is more important. It is something that I think you can take up, and maybe even even the government can even fund that as a small research project or something. So you can think about that. So yeah, I think that is all I wanted to say initially, and I think we can now we can take questions and we can start some conversation.
So, Agnita, can I unmute everybody, all the participants?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to unmute all the participants, and some of you are voluntarily muted. You can also unmute it if you want to ask questions. And the floor is now open to questions if you want to ask any. Smita has already posted 3 questions in the chat. Smita, you might want to just repeat it.
Okay, I will do that. Hi, Agnita.
Hi.
So I was just looking at the list of primates that you said are being imported into India. Every species was exotic except for the slow loris, and you mentioned that the slow loris is being imported into India for black magic. But while the species is already present in India, why do you think it is again being imported? And if it's not for black magic, is pet trade, keeping it as pets also evident in India, slow lorises, like in the West?
Yes. So I would imagine the animals which would be used for black magic are not the ones which are getting imported. They would be the ones which are getting caught from the forest and so northeast and eastern part of India. So the ones which are being imported are illegally imported are definitely for the pet trade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
You were talking about the imports and exports happening across international borders. What is your opinion about the trading happening within India? What kind of primates are being poached and used for various reasons within India? Do you have any idea on that? Because if it's black magic, demand would be there in India or
that. No, so you're saying Indian? You're asking what Indian species are being used for pet trade?
No, sir. I'm asking what is your opinion about poaching within India? For example, the slow lorises are found only in the northeast. So if a person wants to conduct maybe a black magic or some pet trade in South India, they have to import it. They'll have to get it across.
Get it, yeah.
Yes. So what is your opinion about that? What kind of primates are being used for such exchanges? I do not know the terminology that is used, but within India, what is your opinion? What kind of primates are being exchanged?
Yeah, so I think the demand within India for pet trade is for exotic primates. It's not for Indian primates, except for the slow loris. The slow loris is something which is a little bit of in a demand, but the highest demand is for marmosets because, of course, they're small. You can keep it as a pet. It's interactive, etc. And for super rich people, the chimpanzee, I think there were a couple of cases, 3-4 cases, I think, in the past few years of chimpanzees being kept. So I don't think there is a demand for Indian primates. There's not a very high demand for Indian primates being kept as pets, except for the madaris and all that you see in the streets working on rhesus macaques and all. So beyond that, I think there is not demand for Indian species as a pet, except for slow loris. Yeah, and I think that demand also is local. I mean, slow loris. And if somebody from the south or the west, they want to keep a slow loris, most likely it is not caught from the Indian forest, but smuggled in through the Bangladesh border. That is what I think is happening.
What are your opinion about slender lorises, sir? Because in many countries, they assume slender lorises to be slow loris, and slender lorises can be exported only from India and Sri Lanka. So, do you have you come across some cases lately or in the past of slender lorises being exported? They're very small and they can just be put in the undergarments because that's how it is being exported.
Right. I don't think in the recent past we have come across slender lorises being smuggled. There has been any seizure of that. I don't think so. One thing that should be kept in mind, that there are very large animal breeding farms in Southeast Asian countries, also African-based farms, which are breeding these animals. A lot of animals, whatsoever that people want to keep as pets. So it is possible the demands are being met through these farms. Uh, I don't remember any case of slender lorises being seized in the last few years.
Thank you, sir. Should I go ahead and ask the other questions, or
no, Smita, I'll take over. So Avadut is right now in the AIP's handle, and he has raised his hand. Do you want to ask a question, Avadut?
Yes.
Yeah, please continue.
So, hello, Agnida. So I had a couple of questions. So first was like you were talking about bushmeat. For primates, like bushmeat hunting, how much is that actually a problem? Because in Nicobar, the tribals like Shonpins, I think they are exempted from Wildlife Protection Act, and that's why they readily hunt uh, macaques as it's one of their primary food sources. So how's that condition in Northeast or for other primates, like where bushmeat hunting happens?
Yeah.
So that's my first question. So okay, I'll after that I'll ask the second one.
Okay. Yeah. So of course, Shonpins are so few, and for everybody's information, the Wildlife Protection Act has a section in which only the tribes of Nicobar has been exempted from the Wildlife Protection Act for bona fide use of meat, etc. And not even the tribes of Andaman are exempted. And so there's no question of the tribes of Northeast or from the Western Ghats, etc. being exempted. No other tribes except from the tribes of Nicobar are legally exempted. There might be some cultural acceptance locally, but there is no legal exemption from the Wildlife Protection Act except for the tribes of Nicobar. Those are two tribes, Shonpen and Nicobaris. Now, Shonpen, they are so few and confined to just one island. So I don't think there's too much of an impact. So since Arijit here and Avadut, they have worked on that species, they can tell us, but I don't think there's too much of an impact on the species. As far as Northeast is concerned, on the rarer primates like gibbon and all, it is an impact. It is an impact which is there, and but I feel rather than hunting, because these are pretty smart creatures, so it's not that much of a problem. I think more of a problem is the fragmentation of habitats and all, where the canopy is discontinuous, and I think that's more of a problem than bushmeat hunting for the primates in Northeast. Because it is not wildlife crime, I did not mention that really, but I think that is more of a problem. I don't think bushmeat hunting is driving any species to extinction. As of now, that is what I would say.
Okay.
So
So also, my second question was about uh, uh, you must have come across a lot of species which are being traded from different parts of the world, and they're coming to India or they are going out of India. So this is like a very hotbed for transfer of zoonotic diseases from animals to humans, especially something like African chimpanzees coming to India and or Indian animals going to these cells. So how does WCCB looks at this zoonotic disease and their control? Uh,
No, it's just not done. I mean, that's what I was saying, that there is no rescue and rehabilitation protocol, that we need to test for these things or something. That's not there. And I mean, WCCB is a body which is formed out of forest officers, police officers, customs officers. So we our mandate is mainly to gather intelligence, then pass it off to agencies where we are not present, and if we are present, we go for joint raids, and then help with the preparation of court documents and all that. And these are the field operations that we do. Beyond that, we do a lot of trainings in which we educate the forest department, the police personnel, how to handle a wildlife crime case, how to gather intelligence, how to book the case, how to prepare the court documents, and how to conduct yourself in the trial. So that is our role. So now zoonotic diseases and their spread, it's something which is hugely beyond our mandate. But that's where the SOP comes in, which I was saying, that if there is a point by point uh, list that these things need to be done after you catch a primate, then of course those will be circulated with the rescue centers, and then those will be done. Yeah.
so
thank you.
Agnida,
Yeah.
Mohan
Yeah.
has a couple of questions, so let
Okay.
him ask the questions.
Hey, uh,
Hi.
I think in India we have very strong laws, wildlife protection law, which is already formulated. Uh, what the loophole I see over here is the communicating these laws to the local people who are residing surrounding the sanctuary or whatever the forest structure, and it's poorly implemented in lesser known forest areas and enforced in restricted areas. So what's your call on this?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. We have one of the best laws, and I mean, parts of it is so strict that it is not possible to implement actually. So that is it. And because of our lack of infrastructure in all departments, all government departments, more or less all states. Of course, it is better in some states, worse in others, but almost in all states, the forest departments, manpower, infrastructure, is not adequate for the day-to-day operations like plantation and all that. So protect. So I mean, and for species which are not charismatic, it's not a tiger being hunted or a rhino, then of course the priority of the forest department, and if the forest department still has some time to give for these species, but the police, whether they are also empowered in the wildlife protection act, but they can't even cater to some of the human issues, so it's not really likely to expect them to cater to wildlife protection act on a regular basis. So yes, we have the best laws, but we do not have the mechanism to implement it. It is just not there. The infrastructural and logistical issues are too much. So that is thing. You said communication to the local residents. That's not quite there. I mean, people know what is right, and I mean what is legal and what is not legal. More, I think it is the cultural acceptance. I mean, there is a cultural acceptance of keeping parakeets at homes, cultural acceptance of having turtle meat. So those things are there. So I think that's more of an issue. And so how do we go about it? Mm, I don't really know. I mean, we need to have some have a mix of, rather, enforcement actions on the field, and awareness program, and maybe alternative livelihoods and all those cliches. So, and then we can probably have less wildlife crime. However, one point that I want to make is that the demand for most wildlife parts is from outside India. So that is also something that we need to address. If the demand does not arise outside India, we will automatically have lower wildlife crime. And let's hope this pandemic business contributes to less wildlife consumption. Yeah.
Thank you for that. My next question is, during this COVID-19 lockdown, all the state forest department have mentioned or reported there's a drastic increase in the poaching and hunting cases. So what forest department in your region uh, have taken measures on this?
Yeah, so it is there. What you said is may not be a drastic increase, but there has been instances. The thing is that people are without livelihoods and they're locked down in their homes, and so fringe forest dwellers, um, you do not have any income. There is maybe scarcity of protein, so the obvious option is to go for hunting. So WCCB has given an advisory to all the state forest departments to do certain things. One of that, the first thing is to make a list of probable areas, and then have increased vigil and increased monitoring, have new sources being recruited in those areas. And the other thing is that to have a very close look on social media emerging out of those regions, because you might be aware a lot of people just post that we have killed this snake or having this deer meat, etc. So having a close look at the social media handles, and there are some other advisories I can't remember. So we have issued an advisory to all the states to have a increased lookout, and we have alerted our sources also, and we have asked them to report as soon as they come across any such incidents. And if we get across any, we have found some, we are immediately alerting the local police and forest authorities. This is the season for the tribal hunting festivals in the Chotanagpur Plateau area, part of which is in West Bengal, part of which is in Jharkhand, Odisha. This time, fortunately, it is very, very low key because the trains are not running, because people who gather in vans and all that are unable to come to the hunting sites. So it is very low key, but still there are instances of that happening. And fortunately, we are getting information, passing it on to the forest department, and they're handling it pretty well this time. Yeah.
Thank you. My last question, since you have talked about social media, Union Environment Ministry has shown in its report that 106 websites are being used for illegal wildlife and trade in India, including Amazon, Flipkart, and even YouTube. So how Forest Department is vigilant on this website?
So I suppose that that has to be an older report, because in 2018 or 17 end, WCCB, we had convened a meeting in which all the country heads of, not the heads, I mean representatives of social media and online e-commerce platforms, from Facebook to this Alibaba and many others, Locanto, etc., which used to post wildlife articles. I mean, where users used to post wildlife articles. So a meeting was convened, and they were made aware that so this is illegal. And so since then they are using keywords and filters, and they are immediately taking off advertisements which mentions those keywords. They are updating those keywords with our help, and they are also reporting the user profiles sometimes. So I think that is going on. I think that's a good monitoring that is going on in the e-commerce and online websites.
Thank you.
So Anmol wanted to ask a question. Anmol, if you're there, you can.
Yeah. Hi. I was wondering this question of wildlife trafficking, and here we are specifically talking with respect to the primates. It's also deeply rooted in a sense of ethics, how ethical it is to do it. Besides, what are the implications it has for conservation and protection? That's one thing. So to slightly take on from that, in most of the zoological parks across the country, you have these programs in which animals are essentially exchanged in for other exotic animals. So you have some animals, so you have one white tiger going in for say 2 giraffes, or well, I mean, there's some sort of balance that has been struck with respect to what number of animals can be sent for what number of animals are received. And I think this also happens a lot with, I don't know how prevalent it is right now, but I've worked closely with at least 2 zoological parks in India, and some of the internal politics also leads to bringing in of primates like chimpanzees just for the sake of it. I mean, we have the Delhi Zoo had 2 chimpanzees, and both of them passed away way before they matured to like an adult agehood, or they even could reach senescence. Similar was the case with Mysore Zoo. We also had a gorilla there. Alipur Zoo also had a chimpanzee and a gorilla, but that's been some old story. So I was wondering how in this context of ethics and even conservation for that matter, how is this exchange of animals considered much acceptable rather than how we term trafficking as something different? I mean, I understand what trafficking is, but the ecological stress that the animal has to undergo, the stress that the animal has to undergo while traveling, I mean, it's months and it can be weeks if the animal is traveling through waterways. So I'm wondering how would you respond to things like where you have the Wildlife Protection Act saying that, you know, this kind of this taking out of animals and getting in of animals is absolutely not acceptable, but to somehow build a case for zoos, I mean, I don't understand how that is perfectly all right with the conscience of people who are working closely with animals.
Right. So it's not exactly a wildlife crime question, but I will try to answer it to my understanding. So yeah, first of all, as a wildlife researcher previously, kind of an ecologist myself, I firstly definitely agree that no animal or plant or any living creature should be kept outside its optimum living conditions. That's a strict no-no. Arijit was mentioning initially, I don't know if you were there, that I keep orchids with me. So of course, the first and foremost thing for an orchid or for a chimpanzee to thrive is to give the optimum climatic micro conditions that it needs. So if it is not there, it is criminal, definitely. But the CZA, the Central Zoo Authority, they have guidelines which are species specific. So I don't think anything is allowed, and zoos are allowed to function if those guidelines are not met. So if there are anything lacking in those guidelines and they're not prescribing the conditions which are, you know, needed for optimum upkeep of the species, then I'm really surprised to hear that. So, and it should be then flagged by the research community, like you all. And if you do so, I think it's not very difficult to change the rules, because it is not an act. I mean, it flows from the act, but those are the rules, CZA rules, and it can be done by notification by the ministry. So if you do come across very specific suggestions that you want to make, please feel free to do so. Next thing is that what is the ethical rationale regarding having animal undergo the trauma of traveling long periods and then being confined to zoo exhibits? The only rationale is to have public awareness and then maybe a consequent support for conservation of those species. If the, you know, I mean, all zoos are supposed to be generating public awareness and public support for the species that they're exhibiting. So that is the only rationale to have animals confined. What else? So that is what I wanted to say. But I mean, these are not wildlife crime questions per se, but I just conveyed my understanding.
Thank you.
Arijit has a question.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, this is also a general question I would like to ask. as you have mentioned that the all those mastermind for all those devious crimes, they are always away from the sites and out of untraceable. In this case also, I think those people who actively catch or poach those primates or other wildlife, they live close by to this area where these animals habitats and all. And what amount of money or economic reward, that kind of thing they get by doing this crime, that's also less. So do you think that identifying those hotspot area and some community participants, even promoting ecotourism, that will be helpful for it? And along with that, another one question. Do you think that legal legislation for this kind of animal crime, where it's
Arijit, I think we missed a part of what you were saying.
Repeat your question, Arijit.
Yes, yeah. So the thing is, the mastermind for this all trafficking and poaching are away from the actual site. But if you look, people who actively kill or catch those animals, they may be close by from this animal's habitat, right?
Yes.
So if it is the case, so doing some awareness program or some community-based some activity, is it help us to dismantle this connection and all? The first question.
Yeah, and the second one.
And the second one is for this wildlife crime, the legislation is not that strong, which is for other human-related crime. So is it any way that those people those offenders who are doing this, or those criminals, they're getting away with it with small amount of monetary fine or some few days or few months of imprisonment like that?
Right. So let me answer your second question first. Actually, the laws are pretty stringent, and we have the almost the highest quantums of punishment, I think, except China. China, by the way, has very strict wildlife laws, but they don't want to implement that much. But the laws are pretty strict, and I mean, you cannot really expect people to be in prison for more than 3 years for Schedule 3, Schedule 4 species, and for Schedule Part 2, Schedule 2, and Schedule 1 species, it is up to 7 years, 3 to 7 years. That's a pretty long term of imprisonment. But we are not achieving convictions. That is why it appears that the person is only in custody for 14 days and there is never anything else. So to achieve convictions, there are many things that we need to do. Primarily, we are doing those trainings. Forest departments, the primary job is to go about doing plantation and protection, etc. But when it comes to wildlife crime investigation and filing court reports and all, they're not very good. And the courts are used to getting police reports and all that, which are immaculate because police is doing this for hundreds of years. So, so we are not achieving convictions. However, there are pockets of this country where the wildlife law is being implemented in a much better way because the forest has picked up the skill. The department, they have formed specialized teams who are doing that. So we need to, we are actually advocating to have those kind of wildlife crime control units in each state. And if it's a large state, then in smaller parts of the state, each unit. And some of the states like Madhya Pradesh has done brilliantly, and Assam also has done very well. In North Bengal, for a change, the forest department themselves is very, very proactive, and there's almost 100%, nearly 100% prosecution conviction rate for wildlife offenses in the past 5-6 years. So the law is really strict, but we are not achieving convictions. And so we do these trainings in which we try to tell the forest department personnel what to do in case of detection of offenses and all that. So I think that is going to help. That is already showing some improvement, some results. And beyond that, I think the judges also need a little bit of a sensitization. They don't get wildlife cases often and all that. So All that is an ongoing work, and but slowly the conviction rate is improving. That is there. That is very clear. It is improving. So we are looking at better times, I presume. The other question, that whether having ecotourism and other livelihood options would help, it will certainly help. I am a big advocate of controlled ecotourism, because ecotourism, if not controlled, it just spirals out of control and it disturbs the very habitat it is supposed to cater to. So controlled ecotourism is something that is very much beneficial for conservation, because it builds huge amount of local support for conservation, as you can imagine. The other thing that we need to look at is those ecotourism facilities has to be community owned or locally owned. Normally, it is not so. If we look at tiger tourism, which is the lion's share of so-called ecotourism in India, we would see that the major chunk of the income from tourism is taken away by resorts and hotels, which are largely owned by outsiders. Big resort chains or some businessmen from the large cities, but not the local communities. The local communities only gain as drivers and cooks and nature guides, but that's meager compared to what the hotels and resorts are actually earning. But if you look at the cost of having tigers, having a tiger reserve, it is borne by the forest department, because they're investing manpower, money, everything, and the local villages, because their crops are being raided by the herbivores, the cattle are being lifted by the carnivores, there are occasional human deaths. So they bear the cost, but they reap very little of the rewards in the current ecotourism context. So we need to really correct that. There was some attempt with the joining the dots tiger report, but it has not been implemented fully. But if done in its spirit, and if the local communities actually get the land share of benefit, I think it is certainly a very good idea.
Thank you, Agnida.
Partha wanted to ask a question. Partha, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Agnida. It was an amazing talk so far. And so I had a question. I mean, it's more of a generalistic question. So I'm sure when you're looking at all these cases which is cropping up throughout the country, so you must, I mean, it's a given that you have a really good network of people everywhere, and it has to be in many ways. I mean, some could be undercover, some could be overcover. So the thing is, where I'm coming is like, how much do you think it is underreported? Like, how much is actually going on in India, and how much we actually can do? Is there a big gap between that? And if there is, so that leads to my second question, where I want to ask that we being primatologists, we are actually in we work in different habitats, in different states, different places, where we might come across things which we may see, but we don't know what to do about that, because sometimes what happens is it is done by someone really influential, or someone whom we might need in the future, or we don't want to have a negative relationship with the local community there. So in that case, it becomes like really a dilemma for ethical dilemma for many of us, like whether do we report, and if we report, whom do we report? And so basically just wanted to know how, as primatologists, as the field primatologists, many of us, where when we see things, whom do we report and how do we report things? Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So the second part of the question, you can always look up our phone numbers in the WCCB website. Most of our mobile numbers are also there, and landline numbers are definitely there. And WCCB, of course, as a policy, keeps the identity of the sources as a secret. You don't have to reveal also if you don't want to. Your identity, you can just call and leave in your message. You can also email us. Our email IDs are there, official email IDs, and we do receive a lot of emails like that, in which concerned citizens, they voice their concern about some crimes that they see happening. So this will keep you safe, and people can only guess but cannot really pinpoint who has given that information. So that is one thing. So you can do that, and we receive information like that, and also from field researchers. That is one thing. The other thing you asked about, the quantum of wildlife crime actually going on and what we are kind of able to confront and stop. I presume that question is regarding all species, right? Not only
Yeah,
primates.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
in
if
the-
you can give an idea for both, it will be great.
Yeah, so in the initial part of the talk, I was saying that, by the way, my laptop might just get off, my battery is low. If it does, then in a couple of minutes, I will just switch to my phone, okay? Yeah.
Okay, great.
So, yes, so regarding primates, I was saying that there's not too much of a um, primate poaching and smuggling, as we are aware. But in other wildlife species, there are a lot of issues, of course, and high value species like tiger, bear, pangolins. That's a huge problem right now. So of course there is a lot of problem, and my experience in eastern region over the past 3.5 years is that there is much more going on than we are able to intercept, definitely. And as I said, having open borders with Bhutan and Nepal, and having China just north of Nepal and Bhutan, having Myanmar and open points, officially open points with Myanmar, and having China just north of Myanmar, it's it's something of an impossible task then to detect all smugglings happening. So while we do rely on sources at the border points, and while we do rely on sources at the forest where these are being hunted and poached, but there is a lot of money involved in a thing like a rhino horn, and there are a lot of risk involved of lives at times. So I think what we are able to catch is only a fraction of what is actually going on. Yeah.
So if Partha is done, I'll let Shantanu ask a question. Shantanu, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I have two questions. The first one is, does that legalization reduce black market in country like India, where we have a large population density?
Legalization of what?
Like any of hunting or any kind of things. That what we see in some part of European countries.
Yeah, so I have not really thought about that, because I mean, as officers, we are supposed to implement the law as it is. We are not
Yes.
supposed to uh, implement our judgment of what is ethical and what is better. That I don't do, and most of the officers don't do. And if we start doing that, then if you have seen the movie Gangajal, that is what is going to happen. So
Yes.
now the thing is, yeah. So now the thing is. I think, given the population density of India, and given the scarce amount of forest areas and wildlife that we have, it will not be a good idea.
And
I will give an example. Tiger hunting was banned in India in 1969, okay, and the Wildlife Act came in 1972. So before the tiger hunting was banned, when the law was proposed, I think about 1 year earlier, the forest officers themselves invited everybody, all they knew, all their friends, relatives, and asked them, Ki, just come and hunt a tiger, this is your last chance. So tigers were hunted like crazy in those last 11, 12 months. So if you, in a country like ours, if you give illegal support to something like hunting, given our population densities and given our propensity to take advantage of things quickly, I don't think it will be a good thing at all for our wildlife. Yeah.
okay, my second question is, what happens to those confiscated meat?
It is disposed of. It is disposed of generally by burning or by burying, etc., in presence of a group of experts. Responsible persons and all that. There's a process described, and this is after taking samples from it, if needed, for forensic examination.
Okay. My last question is about that you have talked about some livelihood relationship a while ago. So, and like in Chattanapur Plateau area, where 1 month back there have been many incidents where fires have been started one after the another at the same times. So, how much you have noticed or observed in those places, like if there is any relationship of those common people over there for their livelihood to in hunting or any other poaching incident.
I don't think in any part of, I mean, if you're talking about the hunting festivals,
Yes.
they are not really dependent upon hunting for their daily bread and protein. That is not there. And the hunting festivals in if the previous years, I mean the last year and the last to last year, it was not that much, but before that, if anything to go by, it is all the outsiders. I mean, people who are not living there and people who are not really leading the tribal lifestyle. They come in for those events, which is a free for all kind of an event. So I don't think there is any dependence upon hunting for the most part. So that is what I feel it is. But the forest fires are started. I suppose you're from that area, so you would know
Yes, yes.
that forest fires are for mahua flowers and all that for the most part. So may not be for hunting. Forest fires are sometimes antagonistic to the forest department, sometimes for collecting mahua flowers and all that. So the burning, I think, is different from the hunting episodes.
Thank you.
So, Amira, if nobody else has a question, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
So first thing is, when you come across primates from the Southeast Asia, a lot of langurs and other primates, do you usually need help identifying them? And if you do need help, who do you approach usually?
Yes, yeah, we do need help. I mean, generally, it is something which is readily recognizable, like the chimpanzee or the marmosets and all that. But then the langurs, along with the lion cub, there was a lot of confusion what it is. Ultimately, I think it was decided that it was Lao langur and not white-headed langur, which we were thinking. So
Yes. So the thing is that we do not have any institutionalized mechanism for identification. So we just, just contact the primatologist that we know, and we try to get an ID out of that. So that's how it is.
So yeah, all right. So just in connection with that, so when you come across exotic primates, okay, and
Yes.
let's say it's the meat or something, do you still, does the same law apply to those objects or specimens that applies to Indian species?
No, basically they will have to be booked under the Customs Act, and the offense would be smuggling. Okay, as I said, CITES is implemented, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It is implemented through Customs Act. So the offense would be smuggling for exotic species which are not covered in the Wildlife Protection Act, and it will be tried as per the Customs Act. And we only given technical input as identification and all that, but otherwise the thing is dealt with by the Customs Department.
Okay. So just one last question. So if
Yeah,
you're
please.
aware of,
Yeah, sure.
If you're aware of this Lacones in Hyderabad and a few more institutes that have started to work on DNA methods, NCBS and WI has started. Not sure, RNA is also probably doing something. And DNA information is quite valuable insofar as it can also tell you information about the geographical origin of your specimen. So would you be interested if some of these captured specimens, if they could be rehabilitated in the exact forest that they had been captured from, or would that information be of use to the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau? Let's suppose you get a slow loris, and if you can pinpoint the particular forest from which the slow loris has come, would that information be useful to you?
Yes, I think so. I think it would be useful for, let me mention two things here. In CITES, the provision is that if exotic species are caught, they are to be transferred back to the country of origin, but at the cost of the country of origin. So sometimes that is an issue. But if you really know that this slow loris is not from India, it has been brought from Indonesia or something, then of course a dialogue can be opened up with Indonesia for its rehabilitation. I'm giving an example. So that is something where this kind of the original population identification would be really helpful. Secondly, there is something which we are seeing in soft shell turtles in India, that is the consumption of soft shell turtles are mostly in and around Calcutta. That is from Calcutta to the Bangladesh border. I would say it accounts for 70-80% of the total country's soft shell turtle consumption. So turtles come here from UP, being caught in the Gangetic and the Chambal river systems. They come here from Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, being caught from the rivers there. But if they're rescued and if they're seized, then they're all released back in West Bengal itself. Till now, that is the practice. So that is not a good thing, because there are different subspecies from these regions.
Exactly.
So now we have all mixed it up, and of course there's a questions of spreading the disease and everything, different types of parasites and all that. So that is all there. So it would really help to know which population exactly. Something about star tortoises also. They are generally released back in Karnataka, but maybe from Gujarat also. Who knows?
But for star tortoises,
yes,
I think Lacones has done some work, initial work that has kind of enabled us to pinpoint the exact location from which the star tortoises are from. But then it costs a lot.
Right.
For something like this to work, the forest department has to provide a small sample of all the specimens that you catch. So would that be feasible, given the laws?
Yeah, you need to. No, yeah, of course. I mean, research cannot always be allowed. And so you need to have the proper kind of permissions and all. So you need to apply and have the permissions and all that. So totally feasible.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm done with my question. Mohan has another question. Mohan, if you can go ahead, I'll unmute you.
Yeah. My question is, in 2019, Himachal Pradesh government has declared rhesus macaque, wild boar, and nilgai as vermin. And maybe to control, like, is it to control the conflict? And how is the scenario now?
I'm not really aware of Himachal scenario and why they have done that, because I mean that's not exactly crime. But what I know that there are provisions in the Wildlife Protection Act that you can do that. The Chief Wildlife Warden of the state has to take a call, and so leaving the ethical questions aside, it is legal. So they have resorted to that, and I really don't know what is the result. You will have to speak to somebody who is from that area or is looking up this matter.
Thank
you. So do we have any more questions? You can just simply ask if there are any questions, because I don't see any more raised hands. All right. So if there's nothing more, I think Agnida, we should conclude the session. It's been great to have you and interact with the upcoming.
Yeah, there's some chat from Avdut. I think he's trying to ask something.
Oh, right.
Can you just read it for me, because I'm not.
Okay, so Avdut has a question. Sorry, I missed it. So his question is marine wildlife more a threat due to wildlife trade than terrestrial wildlife? And for pet trade, to do dead animal trade? Wait 1 second. I'll take one question at a time. So he asks, is marine wildlife more at a threat than terrestrial wildlife?
There is no generalization per se. We have to look at the species, because right now pangolin is really under a lot of stress because of the Chinese traditional medicine system. But at the same time, some other terrestrial wildlife may not be that coveted because it does not serve any supposed medicinal purpose. So some of the marine wildlife, like the sea cucumber and all, he would be aware, he was in Nicobars with us. So those are highly prized, but some other marine wildlife, like most of the fishes, they have no value as far as the medicinal systems are concerned. So it really depends on individual species. So species which are highly valued as medicinal highly valued as pets, they are more at risk than species which are not. Generally, I would say because our marine protected areas are so few, and because they're already troubled by increasing sea temperatures and all that, I would say there is a higher risk to the marine wildlife than terrestrial wildlife, but may not. I mean, the whole of that risk might not be coming from poaching attempts.
All right. So I think that's it. If anybody else has any questions, then you can just start speaking on the mic. Okay, doesn't seem like anybody else has questions. It was a great session, Agnita, and yeah, we are fortunate to have someone as dynamic as you interact with our upcoming primatologists in India, and we look forward to having more such sessions in the future. And it's been really enlightening, and yeah, we'll always keep in touch.
Right, and yeah, I mean, it's my pleasure to interact with you all, and just give you a little bit of a glimpse of what is happening on ground. So do remember my request about having an SOP of rescue and rehabilitation after seizure. That is something which I think is going to go great length to conserve the specimens that we are live specimens that we seize, and also to address those concerns about zoonotic diseases and all. And I'm sure if there's a good proposal on that, then the government would be ready to fund it from the central ministry. So yeah, so my good wishes to you all, and it has been a very enriching session. Thank you so much for asking very relevant and questions that really relate to these times. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Agnita. Yeah, someone wants to say about
No. Just wanted to tell Agnita that if we can be of any help as AIP, like of course with SOP we will help, but even of course if there is anything more we can do for primate conservation, or when it comes to of course trafficking and crime, so we would really like to help you on behalf of AIP. We would really like to be active in that phase. So if we can do anything, if you think we can be of any help for you, please do not hesitate, I would say. I mean, I'm sure many of us, like Arijit and many of us are still in touch with you, and we help out sometimes maybe with the IDs. But yeah, I mean, something like that.
Sure. I would keep that in mind. Yeah.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that we are done, I just want to make one quick announcement. We have Dr. Erin Kane's talk in line for tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. So it's going to be on orangutans, really interesting. The first time we are going to have a non-Indian species, but probably a really interesting talk, and discussing the methods and probably explore how we can use the same to our Indian species. So please hang around for that tomorrow at 5:30. We have already published a poster. We'll probably publish a few more. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have one. We have a group in Facebook. We have a Twitter handle, and we are trying our level best to sort of showcase Indian primatology and the concerns of Indian primatologists to the world at large. So thanks, Agnita, again, and thanks to all the participants for being really proactive in this meeting. I think I'll just conclude the session here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ram.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Agnita.
Pleasure.